Hello everybody, today's video is going to be about some basic dynamics processing. And I say basics because we're going to do some more advanced stuff after we do a couple more phases of our mixing process here. But what we really need to do in this stage is add some compression to a couple of different elements to make sure that they are just, I don't know, I guess sort of tamed down a little bit. We don't want to do anything too aggressive to really color or change the sound too much. We just want to make the performance and say the vocals, like the levels, a little bit more consistent. But we're really just going to be rounding out the edges. We're not going to be doing anything massive. We're going to save that until a little bit later. So what I'm going to go through is, just how to insert the dynamics processing, how to use the presets, and how to tweak those a little bit. We might also make use of some gates just on some of the drum elements that aren't, that aren't always very active. Like this floor tom, you can see is only active in very specific spots. So we might apply a gate there to sort of clean up some of this in-between sound instead of going through and making a bunch of edits. So let's go ahead and jump right in and get started. Now some of you guys might be more mix window oriented, hitting Command equals and going to this area and seeing your plugins and being in the mindset of looking at this virtual mixing console. Just based on, I think, my experience doing radio stuff and doing a little bit more editing, I wrap my head around the edit window a lot better. I like to see the song structure up here, and I also like to be able to see the waveform so I can choose particular areas that I want to be working with. So I'm a little bit more edit window oriented. I think the first thing that I'm going to do is identify what I'm going to be applying some of this dynamics processing to. Okay, so what do I really want to work with here? Well, I definitely need to compress vocals. That's just sort of a given. And I want to make sure that the drum elements are tamed enough because they have such fast attack times, and sometimes they're hit so hard by drummers. I want to make sure that there's no peaking, so I'm going to use compression to make sure that doesn't happen. But I'm going to exclude the overheads from that because overheads have microphones at a bit of a distance. And if I started to compress overheads, then I would wind up with just this very, very dense cymbal shimmery sort of sound, which I don't want to overwhelm my mix with that kind of stuff. I'm also going to make decisions on whether or not I need these backing tracks. Let's actually go ahead and listen to that right now and just make a decision on that. So already I hear some piano sounds and stuff and some effects on the vocals. So that's telling me that there's some things happening on this backing tracks that aren't actually being performed. So there's no piano on my list of instruments here. So they must really need these things. So I don't think I have a choice. I gotta leave the backing tracks in there. I'm not gonna do any dynamics processing with them, but I just wanted to make sure that I actually needed them. And that might be different based on what song you're working on. So you have to sort of make a decision about whether or not your backing tracks are essential to the song or not. And it's sort of the mixer's decision whether or not to just get rid of that or mute it and decide whether or not you really need that or not. Okay, so moving on from there, let's start by applying a gate to, say, the tom. Because I know right here, if I solo my floor tom, that's not the actual floor tom being hit. This is all the other stuff in the room. This right here is where the floor tom hits. So I want to make sure that I can use a gate to sort of prevent this stuff from happening. So again, if you're relatively new to this stuff, a gate is going to affect our dynamic range. I'm going to insert it by choosing a dynamics plugin called Expander Gate, which is what you've got with your basic version of Pro Tools that you've gotten for free there. And what it is I'm setting a threshold level, and that represents this orange line right here, and that's saying that no matter what, as long as something on this audio track is not passing this threshold, then it's going to be complete silence. Alright, so I'm just going to set this in a certain way, manipulating the threshold so that this area here is below that threshold, and to make sure that when the floor tom is actually hit, it's above the threshold and opens up the gate and allows that sound to be heard. So I need to find an area that's got all the noise and it's got the toms being hit. So let's take a listen and start adjusting this threshold. So if I lower the threshold more, then we'll start to hear everything in between. So I'm not going to be able to get this perfect, but I want to make sure that the tom itself, when it does come in, is not too abruptly ended because the sound fades. So if that means I have to introduce a little bit of the snare or cymbal sound in between, that's okay, because I'm going to add it with all these other things. But relatively speaking, I've cleaned up a lot of this extra sound. So let's listen to it before and after. This is what it was like before and after. So it's cleaning up a lot of this extra sound and giving me a significant amount of more control over these things. So if I like that setting and I'm cool with that, I can now explore the mid-tom and then copy these settings by holding Option, that would be Alt on a PC, and then clicking and dragging that plugin. And it's going to create a copy of it with the exact same settings. So now I can do the same thing, is listen to this track and see how it's sounding. So that's actually pretty nice for that one too. And then I'll check the high tom one last time. So copy. So I'm getting a lot more snare sound. So I'll raise the threshold. Cool. So if I put all those together, let's just do all the drums. Let's hear how that sounds now. So I'm definitely not compromising the toms. I still hear the tom sound, and even if I'm like chopping a little bit of the fade out of those toms, a little bit of the ringing because it's eventually dropping below that threshold, I'm making up for it with them in the overheads. That's why I don't want to mess with the overheads hardly at all. Alright, cool. So next up, I want to make sure that I add compression on a couple of things, but again, like light compression, because we're going to do some more massive, aggressive sort of things a little bit later. So I'm going to add on the kick drum a Dynamics 3 compressor limiter that you have access to, and there's no shame in using the presets. So I'm going straight to making that kick tight. That's what I want. It's sort of what the genre calls for. And I'm looking at gain reduction and output. So I can see I have a lot of room to add some gain. And notice I want to keep my gain reduction relatively small. It's only when it's really being hit hard that we're seeing it peak in the gain reduction. And I also want to make sure that I'm not distorting. So that's why I was dropping down my makeup gain here. And if you do peak, then you lower it, and then you reset your meter by clicking on it. So I'm really just kissing the kick drum with this compressor at this point. So just like negative, like 1 or 2 dB gain reduction there is what I'm looking for. And then just adding the makeup gain that I have the ability to, just so my output is greater than my input and I have a strong signal to be mixing with later. Alright, cool. So I'm happy with the kick drum. I'm going to do the same thing to the snare. So I'm just going to copy and paste again and listen to the snare and find a heavy snare area. So I might need to tame this one a little bit more so I could make my compression a little bit more aggressive. But again, I don't want to do too much. I just want to make sure that I've got a little bit of gain reduction. And that I back off my makeup gain just enough so I'm not distorting ever. Now, it's not like I have to be perfect just because I clip every once in a while. I mean, I'm not hearing a nasty, crazy, grainy, crackly distortion sound. So I just want to make sure that this doesn't happen consistently. But if it happens every once in a while, I think I'm going to be okay. Again, just barely having any gain reduction, but just a little bit. And then listening to before and after. So we're going to be having lots of subtle changes here, but that's totally okay. So I'm probably going to go through, and I would do the same thing for these floor toms and stuff like that. Just to sort of even out those things a little bit. But then certainly the vocals. And one quick way that I can do this sort of stuff is by selecting the two things that I want to apply this to. And if I know that I'm going to add compression here, then Shift Option is going to apply what I'm doing to all selected tracks. So I'm going to create the compressor on both of those tracks at the same time. Pretty nice. Do some compression on that lead vocal. We'll choose the chorus, where there's a lot of things happening in the vocal area. Now this is going to be the exception. Vocals I'm going to compress, well, I'm going to give it some more beef. I'm gonna try to fatten it up a little bit, even at this point, and then I'm gonna crush it again later. So probably I'm gonna do heavier compression than I would on the drums at this point, just because I really need to make sure that those, especially the lead vocal, really needs to pop through.
This is our fight. There's nothing.
Okay, so listen to the before and after here. Here's before. And then after. Look at the difference between my output and my input, how much gain reduction I'm getting, and how much I'm adding back in. Yes, there's a lot of guitar in that sound. No, we're not going to be able to get rid of it, and I think it would be too abrupt to actually use a gate on this. And the reason why is because if we're compressing so hard, which we want to do because when the vocals are present, we want them to peek through, but then if we constantly are ducking this out, it's going to be a noticeable difference. So I think, unfortunately, we're sort of married to this performance. We're not going to be able to clean it up enough. So we'll just have to deal with it sort of throughout. So I'm going to do the same sort of thing to the bass vocals. And we'll just see if I really need that level of intensity.
I'm falling off a cliff, chasing you.
I'm actually a little surprised that bass vocal sounds like a little bit of a stronger voice in this case. But it looks like the levels are good. And really what I'm most concerned with is the quality of the sound here. We're going to do some mixing later, so if the bass vocals are like the backups and they're not quite as important, then we'll just simply bring the levels down later, but I want it to sound as best as it can at this point. Okay, so you're going to do that for all the different elements that you think deserve it. I'm just avoiding the bass and the guitar at this point. They seem like really solid performances. They're using a lot of heavy distortion and stuff like that. It doesn't look like there's a lot of need to compress that too much. So I'm choosing to leave those alone. You'll see down here on my master that I'm starting to clip. So one thing that you might do moving towards the mix window is select your everything but the master group and bring that stuff down like 5 to 6 dB or something like that while we're making these changes, and then sort of reset your master. That might be helpful. Okay, so moving on from here, we're going to be doing some more advanced kind of stuff. First we'll be panning and doing some adjustments that way, and then we're going to start doing the send effects and creating some auxiliary tracks. So we're going to go to some really cool places after this. Have some fun with this, and let's make this stuff sound really cool. See you next time.